In the very first video that I ever uploaded on this channel, I talked about just how absurd some of the main villains during the East Blue saga were. Luckily, that video ended up doing really well, and it led to what I do on this channel today, posting at least one One Piece video a week about various topics. We talk about groups of characters, we talk about the power system, and we've even started a review series of the series, and one of those things is what we're here to continue today. Today, we're here to talk about yet another group of characters, because we've already talked about East Blue main villains, we've already talked about East Blue allies, and today we're here to talk about East Blue side villains. The main villains of the East Blue saga were already wacky enough, but pretty much all of them had people that worked under them, so it only makes sense that they're even wackier. This video will also allow me to talk about some of the East Blue villains that I didn't end up talking about in my first video, mainly because I don't see somebody like Arlong as a wacky villain. With that being said, I could definitely see some of the people that work under him as wacky villains, and that's why I'll be talking about them in this video. Early One Piece just keeps on giving when it comes to content on this channel, and enjoyment for me, as I love to do the research for certain topics regarding the series when I come up with them. This video is also going to be a little bit different from the first one, because Alvida and Morgan don't even have named characters under them for me to talk about. That would mean that our first arc that we'll be talking about today is the Orangetown arc, but I do have a few things to say about the unnamed side villains in the Romance Dawn arc before we truly start the video. This is because Alvida had some idiots working under her, and they may have proven that her grip over her crew wasn't as tight as she thought it was. When these two guys right here found the barrel that Luffy washed up in, they thought that they would be able to drink the supposed liquor that was inside of it and not tell Alvida what they found. This not only leads to them getting punched by a Luffy that explodes out of the barrel, but it also leads to them getting hit by Alvida, who thinks that they're betraying her. I just felt like I needed to talk about these guys because they might just be the most well-known side villains in all of One Piece, solely because they appear in the very first episode of the anime. And when it comes to the Marine soldiers under Captain Morgan, they're worth talking about solely because of how scared they are of Captain Morgan himself. You see, as the reader of this story, we only get to see Captain Morgan get easily defeated by Luffy, but it's kinda hard to realize just how strong Luffy is, even at the very beginning of the story. In the very first chapter, he punches a sea monster so hard that it just retreats back into the sea, and I don't see a single world where any one of Captain Morgan's men could do the same thing. This makes their fear of Captain Morgan truly justifiable, but it also proves that Morgan may have been smarter than we gave him credit for, because he manipulated that fear perfectly. That's why it feels truly liberating when Luffy defeats Captain Morgan at the end of the arc, and why it feels so slimy when the Navy leader kicks Zoro and Luffy off of the island. And with that, we can move on to the Orangetown arc, as Buggy's crew definitely has some wacky side villains that are worth talking about. The first of those members is a guy named Kabaji, and before we start talking about him, I think it would be best to talk about the theme that Buggy's crew follows. Buggy's crew is very clearly based on a circus, as our guy Kabaji rides a unicycle while sword fighting, and the other guy that we'll be talking about, Moji, is a lion tamer. This makes his actions during the Orangetown arc even crazier, as the very first time that we see him, he unswallows a sword in order to try to challenge Mayor Boodle. Luckily for Boodle, Buggy ends up fighting him instead, as Kabaji obviously would have beaten him too, it just would have been a little bit more embarrassing. The major thing that Kabaji does in the Orangetown arc, however, is have his duel with Zoro, and it's this duel that solidifies him as absurd. This is because even though Zoro is established as a pretty strong pirate hunter and swordsman at this point, Kabaji still tries to fight him while riding a unicycle and actually has a little bit of success. Now, even though he only has that success because of the fact that he kicks Zoro's wound, that really shouldn't take away from this feat, as only Buggy and Mihawk are able to hurt Zoro without a handicap. That might have sounded like the two most insane names to pair together, even though the one that you wouldn't expect is a Yonko right now while the other isn't, but just hear me out on this explanation. Buggy was also only able to hurt Zoro because he caught him off guard with his devil fruit, but Buggy being compared to Mihawk makes my narrative funnier, so I'm gonna stick with it. So, during Romance Dawn, Zoro easily held off 10 plus Marines at once, despite the fact that he starved himself for multiple days, and he defeated Captain Morgan once Luffy attacked Helmeppo. During Orangetown, he easily cut down Buggy before it was revealed that his devil fruit doesn't allow allow him to get cut, and he stabbed Zoro in the side. Even after he did so, however, Zoro flipped an entire cannon over by himself, and then lifted Luffy's cage that took multiple men to move, even though his guts were literally spilling out. He then has his fight against Kabaji that we already talked about, but he pretty easily wins it after cutting his own wound and kicking Kabaji off of his unicycle that was allowing him to do his tricks. He may have also taken a nap after defeating Kabaji, but he was also the member of the Straw Hat crew that scared the remnants of the Buggy Pirates when they were trying to get away. Then, during the Syrup Village arc, he easily held his own against both of the Meow Band brothers, even though he was handicapped by one of them stealing two of his swords at the very beginning of the fight. And even though he took extra damage because Usopp tried to be a hero and protect him, he pretty easily beat both of the brothers once he got all of his swords back. I mean, sure, the fat one didn't stay down, but Zoro pretty easily handled him as well, even after he was hypnotized by Jango to be stronger than he had any right to be. Then, during the Baratie A arc, he lost against Mihawk, but he was destined to lose that fight, and that's one of the people that I already mentioned. After this, he recovers for a short amount of time while Luffy fights against Dawn Krieg, and the rest of the crew goes after Nami because she tried to steal the Going Merry. This of course led to Zoro making it to Arlong Park, and even though Usopp and one of the bounty hunting brothers abandoned him, he was able to take out a ton of Arlong's men after Nami let him out of his cage once Arlong went down to Kokoyashi Village. Then, during the final battle, he defeated Hachi with relative ease, even though two of his original swords were broken by Mihawk, and he was still heavily damaged from his fight with Mihawk. I mean, if you really think about it, he didn't struggle at all, and even asked for the swords of Johnny and Yosuku, which were definitely worse than two of the three swords that he had during his first appearance. He then has a little fight against Arlong, where even though he loses, he does hold Arlong off long enough for Luffy to rejoin the fight and kick Arlong's ass. He's also completely fine during the Logtown arc, where he makes decisions that have still affected his character to this day, but we're not going to be talking about any characters that were introduced in this arc, so I think it's fine to leave things here. So, that tangent was really long, but it was all to prove that Kabaji's loss to Zoro wasn't all that bad, and that he truly did better against an injured Zoro than some other characters did. In all honesty, he's just been riding Buggy's coattails since the time skip, but he did fight against Moji for the position of captain of the Buggy Pirates once Buggy was seemingly dead, but that's something that we'll be discussing more after we start focusing on Moji himself. I would say that Kabaji is technically a member of Cross Guild now since Buggy is his captain, and I'd honestly say that that's what's best for him since the 7 Warlords of the Sea don't exist anymore. And with that, we can move on to the next member of Buggy's crew that's worth talking about in my opinion, and that's the Lion Tamer, Moji. Now in all honesty, Moji is a 2-for-1 because of his lion partner Richie, who's honestly his equal partner in every way. In Moji's very first appearance, he was riding on top of Richie and wanted to try to kill Zoro himself because he was way too confident in his own abilities. A dude riding a lion would be absurd enough, but the fact that he decides to pick a fight with a tiny dog cements the fact that he'll always be a wacky character. If you really think about it, Moji and Richie's lives both go downhill once they decide to steal from Chow Chow's pet store, and this is how. Firstly, they both lose to Luffy in embarrassing fashion, as Richie goes down in a single hit, and Moji does the same thing pretty quickly after. After this, Richie gets used as a human shield when Luffy sends back one of Buggy's Buggy Balls, and Moji even fails to tell Buggy about the fact that Luffy has a devil fruit. Because of this, he gets sent at Luffy, who kicks him in the face, marking the end for both Moji and Richie in this arc, because they don't do anything after this. With that being said, just like Kabaji, this isn't the only time that these two appear in the story, and I think that now is the perfect time to talk about the cover story that all 3 side villains of the Buggy Pirates appear in. This cover story is called Buggy's Crew Adventure Chronicles, and it features the remnants of the Buggy Pirates trying to figure out what to do without Buggy, and features Buggy trying to get his body parts back after he was separated from them. This cover story is genuinely insane, as it features Kabaji and Moji fighting for the title of captain, Richie knocking out both Kabaji and Moji and becoming captain himself, and the entire crew almost getting eaten by cannibals. Yeah, the cannibal thing wasn't something that I expected myself to say either, but luckily Buggy comes in at the last second and saves them from being eaten. Ever since then, just like Kabaji, Moji and Richie have been riding Buggy's coattails, and are seemingly members of Cross Guild as well. With that being said, there are 2 more appearances of theirs that I want to talk about, and the first one happens during the Logtown arc. It was here where it was his job to burn down the Straw Hat ship so they couldn't get away, but I really just wanted to mention him because of his design. Moji is treating Richie more like a vehicle now, as the guy has braided hair to act as handlebars, and has a light on the top of his head that really reminds me of a motorcycle. It's honestly not bad design, but if I had a nickel for every time that we see a different character ride something motorcycle-like during the Logetown arc, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. And then we also have to talk about his post-time skip design, because you could definitely say that him and Richie have been living pretty comfortably. Both of them are a lot more plump now, and in their very first appearance post-time skip, we get to see both of them stuffing their faces as Buggy learns about the Giants leaving Buggy's delivery. The Buggy Pirates have also grown at this point to feature both Alvida and Mr. 3, but they weren't original members of the crew, so we won't be talking about them in this video. And with that, I think we're done talking about the wacky side villains that were a part of Buggy's crew. I don't know how Oda was able to do it, but he made these guys absurd and legitimately terrifying at certain points, but that all came from perspective. There's just no chance that a character like Moji could ever be scary in the eyes of someone like Luffy, but when we're experiencing events from the eyes of a little dog trying to protect its master's store, they're seen as a true threat. Moji has always been more impactful than Kabaji in my opinion, solely because of his connection to Chow Chow, and Luffy getting revenge for him will always be satisfying. And with that, we can move on to the Black Cat Pirates, as Captain Kuro also has some pretty absurd characters working under him. There are 3 of them to be exact, as we have the Meow Band brothers, Sham and Butchie, and the moonwalking hypnotist, Jango. The Meow Band brothers are definitely some interesting characters, because even though there are 2 of them, for the role that they fulfill in the story, they might as well both be the same character. They both act like they're scared of fighting, despite being pretty strong, with Sham being the skinny one, and Butchie being a little bit bigger. Now that wouldn't seem like something that I would need to bring up, but Sham being skinny and Butchie being fat are the 2 reasons that Zoro doesn't defeat both of them right away. Zoro only cuts Sham's shirt because he's wearing one that's way too big for him, and even though he lands a massive attack on Butchie, he's able to get back up because of his quote-unquote blubber. I'm telling you, these guys don't really do much of anything because they don't even appear again after this arc, and that honestly goes for most of Kuro's crew. Jango is really the only one that's still somewhat relevant in the story, and it seemed like Oda had completely forgotten about Kuro before he recently put him on the cover page of one of the chapters. And mind you, this isn't a cover story that Kuro gets, it was an illustration request from a random One Piece fan, so I think it's safe to say that he doesn't really care about his character. With that being said, we're here to talk about the Meow Band brothers, and while they were strong enough to fend off a Zoro that was only using one sword, they can't stand up to Kuro at all. They even try to fight him at one point because they think that he may have gone soft during his 3 years off, but he shuts that shit down immediately, and the 2 of them go back to trying to kill the Straw Hats. These guys truly take up one of the smallest fractions of the One Piece story that any named characters have ever taken up, but I felt like they had to be talked about in this video solely because of their designs. I know that they're from a crew called the Black Cat Pirates, but these guys truly embrace it with some long ears that look like cat ears, long claws, and even some fangs for when things get really bad. These guys were just an appetizer for the guy that's really worth talking about when it comes to the Black Cat Pirates, as the main course for this video is a dude named Jango. I've already mentioned him a few times in this video, and the fact that he's a moonwalking hypnotist is just scratching the surface when it comes to his wackiness. This is because Jango has a supernatural ability that he can use without having eaten a devil fruit, and there are so many of them in this story that they might just get their own video one day. This is because while he is a hypnotist, the success rate of his hypnotism isn't something that comes naturally. After eating a mushroom that had grown on his chin, Jango developed the ability to influence and control others through hypnosis, as long as he makes them watch the swinging of his pendulum, listen to the orders he gives them, and listen to the phrase that he uses to make his hypnosis take effect: 1, 2, Jango. When successful, he can hypnotize enemies to fall asleep, incapacitating them quickly and easily, as well as aid allies by commanding them to tap into subconscious reserves of strength, which actually does make them physically stronger in addition to boosting their morale. The only way to counter Jango's hypnotism is to know that it's coming, because if you let Jango go through all of the steps, he will hypnotize you every single time. A mushroom growing out of his chin is also pretty concerning, but he doesn't strike me as a guy that behaves very often, so I'm gonna assume that that's how that happened. Jango is a lot more fun than the Meow Band brothers during the Syrup Village arc, and he's clearly the member of the Black Cat Pirates that Kuro trusts the most, seeing as he made him the acting captain. He's once again a pretty terrifying threat from the right perspective, as when he was chasing Kaya through the woods with the Usopp Pirates protecting her, I was genuinely scared for them. He's also hilarious, getting hit in the nuts during that fight, and even falling asleep in the middle of the street because he's an idiot. Oh yeah, even though this guy does have hypnotism that always works, he also forgets to close his own eyes at times, and that causes him to fall asleep alongside his target. There's also a chance that he could evolve these hypnotism skills past simply putting people to sleep or giving other people strength, but only time will tell if we actually get to see anything. Jango definitely made the Syrup Village arc more entertaining because of his inclusion, but it's the stuff that he does after that arc that makes him worth talking about in this video. This is because he appears in multiple cover stories, but the one that's most important to his future is called Jango's Dance Paradise. The cover story begins with Jango waking up after the battle against the Straw Hats, and ends with him joining the Marines with his new friend Full Body because they both fell for Hina at first sight. So that's a pretty big jump in the timeline, so how exactly did we get there? Well, first he gets chased out of Syrup Village by the Usopp Pirates, and then he makes his way to a nearby island. On this island, he first disguises himself, and then wins a dance contest, celebrating his victory with his new friend Full Body. He figures out that Full Body is a Marine, but before anything too crazy can happen between them, some random pirates attack the island, and both Full Body and Jango fend them off. Being the somewhat good Marine that he is, Full Body decides to take Jango in, but the two of them literally manage to make the court erupt into a dance party, so Jango gets acquitted. It also may have helped that the judge overseeing the case was literally drunk, but that's when both Full Body and Jango see Hina and decide to join her squad because of how much they admire her. Jango becoming a Marine is something that I never expected from his character, but the Marines are where he's at to this day, and he's made his way all the way from a seaman recruit to a lieutenant commander after only 2 years. He hasn't done the craziest things just yet, but he was a member of the group that tried to capture the Straw Hats after Alabasta that got tricked by Mr. 2 and his crewmates pretending to be them. He was also with his buddy Full Body at the Marineford War, and were even some of the first people to see Luffy and his buddies from Impel Down make it to the battlefield. Now, even though he's a member of the Marines at this point, I don't think that it means that he's all that much more powerful, mainly because Luffy's Conqueror's Haki could still knock him out during Marineford. Now, this was pre-time skip, however, and Jango has made a few more appearances post-time skip, with all of them coming in the Whole Cake Island saga and beyond. During the Reverie, he was a part of Hina's squad who escorted the Nefertari family to it, and that's kind of ironic given what happened to Hina and her squad at the end of the Alabasta arc. And his last appearance so far happened during the Egghead Island arc, as him and Full Body were visiting G1, and Branu showed them the battleship bags that Garp and Aokiji used to train on. Jango is another character from the early story that leaves an impact on the arc that he first appears in, but since Oda never forgets characters, he's continued to have an impact to this day, no matter how small it is. And with that, I only have 3 more characters that I want to talk about in this video, and only one of them comes from the Baratie arc. This is because while Don Krieg does have 2 named characters working under him, Gin is a total badass, and honestly one of the most likable characters that gets introduced in this arc. I don't really think that he's wacky in the slightest, as his loyalty to Krieg is admirable if not a little stupid, and the way that he still cares about Sanji even though they're forced to fight is really great as well. His fight against Sanji is always something that will stick with me, as I can still remember my reaction to it the first time that I ever watched the series during the pandemic. We're not here today to talk about Gin, however, because we're here today to talk about one of his crewmates, Invincible Pearl. Invincible Pearl looks like this, and it's because of his looks and strength that he's the commander of the Krieg Pirates 2nd Unit. Now, while this guy definitely is a threat because of the damage that he's able to do to characters like Sanji, I have never really seen him as anything other than a joke. This is because Pearl is a towering man whose ensemble includes 2 large iron plates covering his front and backside, as well as 2 small plates with large pearls embedded in them for strong, blunt attacks. When introduced, he claims that he is a shield man, but also a dandy man, referring to the iron plates that he wears on his body, as as well as his notably handsome face. From his very introduction, this man is an absolute nutcase, claiming that he's never even lost a drop of blood in battle, but that can't be true because of what happens when he actually does lose some blood. This is because once Krieg sends Luffy flying into the back of Pearl, his face smashes into his shield, causing his nose to bleed and for him to completely freak out. Now, him freaking out at seeing his own blood would actually make sense if he had never lost any in battle, but something tells me that this isn't the first time that this has happened, as the rest of his crew knows exactly what he's about to do. They even try to tell him that it's only a nosebleed, and something tells me that they've had to try to calm him down in the past, and it just didn't work. With that being said, I've been hyping up the crazy shit that Pearl is about to do, so what exactly is it that he's about to do? Well, you see, once Pearl sees his own blood and freaks out, he quite literally sets himself on fire, something that he used to do when he was growing up in the jungle and felt like he was in danger. When Pearl starts panicking, he protects himself by causing friction sparks to ignite his body with a defensive layer of intensely hot flames, becoming Fire Pearl, and surprisingly, Pearl isn't affected by the high heat of the flames that coat his own body. He's able to set people alight with flames in this state, and can also shoot multiple fireballs, composed of pearls that are ignited by his flames. Now that is some pretty insane durability in the grand scheme of things, as not every character can just set themselves on fire and be completely fine. With that being said, despite the fact that he brags about his own strength quite a bit, he isn't really able to do any damage to anybody on the Baratie until Sanji quite literally stops fighting back. The attacks that he hits Sanji with are pretty devastating, but before Gin started holding Zeph hostage, Sanji was cooking him and even managed to kick him in the nose that was already bleeding. Without Gin holding Zeph hostage, I believe that Sanji would have defeated Pearl pretty easily, shown to us when Gin decided to fight Sanji himself and defeated Pearl in a single shot in order to do so. At the very end of the Baratie arc, Gin tells Sanji to tell Luffy that he can't wait to see him again on the Grand Line, and this is a promise that a lot of fans thought that Oda just forgot about. This was until we got Vegapunk's message about the One Piece world sinking during the Egghead Island arc, and we finally got to see Krieg's crew again, as they've made it all the way to Hachinosu after 2 years. And wouldn't you know it, one of the people on that island alongside Gin and Don Krieg is their second unit commander, Invincible Pearl. Now, in all honesty, I don't know if we'll ever see any of the members of the Krieg Pirates ever again, but the fact that we got to see them after all this time was honestly a treat. And with that, we can move on to the final East Blue crew that has some side villains that I want to talk about in this video, as the Arlong Pirates have 2 characters that I think are worth mentioning. They're both officers in Arlong's crew, they both have some pretty insane designs, and the first one that I want to talk about is a guy named Chu. This guy is a smelt whiting fishman, and his giant mouth and lips are actually really important to his character and the way that he fights. In the beginning of the Arlong Park arc, he doesn't really do much other than help Arlong terrorize the citizens of Kokoyashi Village, but he definitely plays a big role when it comes to the final battle. This is because he has a fight against Usopp in a defining character moment for Usopp, but a really embarrassing character moment for Chu. At the beginning of the fight, Usopp decides to play dead in order to survive, but decides against it after realizing just how serious his new crewmates are about their current battle. This leads to his intense fight against the fishmen, and while this is an incredible feat for Usopp, it's just a little embarrassing for Chu, as all it took was a little fire and a hammer to take him out. This guy was also scared of a rubber band a few times, despite the fact that he's quite literally 10 times stronger than a normal human, and rubber bands don't even cause lasting damage on regular humans. Chu was a guy that was spit on in order to bring Usopp up to the level of the rest of his crewmates, and while it's really powerful, it is funny to think about from Chu's perspective. You're just dominating the East Blue until one day some random stretchy boy and his ragtag group of friends come to take away your map maker. Now, they're completely justified in doing so because you guys treat her like shit, but they're a bunch of inferior humans that shouldn't stand a chance against you. Then the stretchy boy walks up into your compound, defeats a ton of your brothers by creating a giant sea cow tornado, and now you know that you've got a real fight on your hands. The people of Kokoyashi Village are also standing outside of your compound, so you now know that they're about to rebel, but before you can do anything against them, you get hit by this long-nosed coward. Now you know that this guy is a coward because you chased him out of town earlier, but now that he's a member of the crew that's trying to take yours down, you have to try to defeat him no matter what. You then proceed to lose to the weakest member of the Straw Hat Pirates, your boss gets defeated, and all of you get arrested by the Navy. It's honestly a horror story for a crew as powerful as Arlong's, and it's extra extra embarrassing for Chu because he lost to Usopp. And for the final character that we have to talk about today, we've got a member of Arlong's crew that embodies the wackiness and aloofness that inspired this video, a fishman named Hachi. Hachi, or Hachan, is an octopus fishman who used to be an officer of the Arlong Pirates. After the rest of the Arlong Pirates were arrested, Hachi was the sole member to escape and went on many adventures, which ended in him opening a floating takoyaki restaurant and meeting up again with the Straw Hat Pirates. In all honesty, this guy was always the most likable member of the Arlong Pirates in my opinion, and he's proven that in every appearance that he's made since that arc. Hachi during the Arlong Park arc was also just hilarious, never realizing how serious the situation was until it was too late, and even making fun of Nezumi to his face at the very beginning. He's always felt like the least evil member of the Arlong Pirates, mainly sticking around Arlong because of their days together as a part of the Sun Pirates. Unfortunately, Hachi's aloofness is taken advantage of by the Straw Hats, mainly Zoro, as he doesn't notice that Zoro badly injured a ton of his brothers and even towed him to safety since he wrongly assumed that he was Arlong's guest. He's also got a pretty goofy fight against Zoro in the grand scheme of things, especially since his philosophy seems to be more swords equals stronger swordsmen. In the eyes of Zoro, this fight is all about his promise to never lose again, but in the eyes of Hachi, he shouldn't be losing because he has more swords and they weigh more than Zoro's. I just think that Zoro literally yelling at him to come down and fight him while he's stuck on a pole is genuinely hilarious, especially because of what Zoro was fighting through in order to fight him. Hachi also becomes an incredibly emotional character during the Saboti arc, because he's ultimately the reason that Luffy punches Charlos and gets the rest of the Straw Hats in trouble. This is because, after a really comedic reunion between Hachi and the Straw Hats, he decides to become their guide as they adventure on Saboti. This seems like something that he's doing because it's a nice gesture, but we come to learn that he's actually doing it because he wants nothing more than for Nami to know that he's sorry for what happened to her in the past. Something that I love about this is that all of the Straw Hats immediately know that he's telling the truth after he got shot by Charlos, and the anger that it makes them feel literally jumps off of the page. As a big fan of Hachi, I've always wished that he did more during the Fishman Island arc, but he did do one massive thing during the time skip that I think a lot of One Piece fans forget about. About 1 year after the Straw Hats separation, the Marines located the Thousand Sunny and attempted to destroy it. Hachi, Duval, the Rosy Life Riders, and Kuma fought a great battle against the Marines in an effort to protect it. Hachi and Duval sustained serious injuries and were forced to retire, leaving Kuma to guard the ship, and that's why Hachi is still injured during the Fishman Island arc. This man is quite literally the reason that Luffy is able to make it to Fishman Island and save his country, so I guess that I can't be too mad that he doesn't appear all that much in the arc itself. And unfortunately for me, and everybody else that's a fan of his character, Hachi also hasn't appeared again after the Fishman Island arc, so we don't know what he's currently doing. I'm sure that we'll see him at least one more time before the story ends, but now that we're done talking about him, we're done talking about every character that I wanted to talk about in this video. As I've said many times throughout this video and others, early One Piece is simply great and will only gain more talking points as the story reaches its conclusion. Even the characters that I talked about in this video will probably get some more important moments worth discussion, and that's why I'm always willing to make more content as long as there's more stuff for me to talk about. I probably came up with even more ideas while writing this video, so there's gonna be more content on the way, whether you think that that's a good thing or not. With that being said, that's all I really have to say about the side villains of the East Blue Saga for now, so I think it's time to end things here. Please join me next time for whatever I post next. Please leave a like and maybe subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye bye.